In the summer of 1941, a man sat in a luxurious Wall Street office who would soon change the nature of American espionage. William Donovan, nicknamed Wild Bill, was a legend. World War I hero with the Medal of Honor, successful millionaire lawyer, friend of President Roosevelt. But now he was troubled by a different problem. America was preparing for war with intelligence capabilities barely above those of a third-rate country. In 1941, the United States had virtually no centralized foreign intelligence. The FBI handled domestic matters and operated somewhat in Latin America. Military intelligence was fragmented. Each service branch had its own agencies that didn't share information with each other. There was no single organization coordinating espionage, sabotage, or subversive activities abroad. The British, already 2 years into war with Germany, were alarmed by American unpreparedness. Their Special Operations Executive, created to set Europe ablaze, demonstrated that modern war required new types of operations: sabotage, guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, working with resistance movements. The traditional military didn't know how to do these things. Donovan spent several months of 1941 traveling through Europe and the Middle East, studying British methods. He met with intelligence chiefs, observed SOE operations in the Balkans, talked with partisans. Upon returning, he presented Roosevelt with a memorandum containing a revolutionary proposal. America needed an entirely new organization, separate from existing military and intelligence structures. An organization that would handle the full spectrum of unconventional operations. On June 13, 1942, President Roosevelt signed the order creating the Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Donovan received the rank of Major General and complete freedom of action. He had to build American intelligence from scratch, and he decided to do it unconventionally. Donovan understood that traditional military bureaucracy wasn't suited for covert operations. He needed people with specific qualities: intelligence, education, language skills, ability to improvise, social connections that opened doors worldwide. He decided to look not in the military, but in universities, corporations, and high society. Recruitment began in America's most prestigious places: Yale University, where the secret society Skull and Bones had been preparing the nation's elite for a century; Harvard, with its professors who knew a dozen languages and had European connections; Princeton, which produced diplomats and scholars; Wall Street, where bankers and lawyers regularly traveled to Europe on business. The typical OSS recruit looked nothing like an ordinary soldier. He might be 35 or 40, wore glasses, had a doctorate in medieval European history or economics. He spoke fluent French, German, possibly Italian. He'd spent years in European archives, knew the continent better than many of its inhabitants. He had connections. A classmate now worked at a Swiss bank. A graduate school professor remained in occupied France. Donovan also sought people with money and connections. Heirs to industrial dynasties who spent vacations in Swiss chalets and on the French Riviera. Aristocrats whose families were linked by marriage to European nobility. Diplomats who'd served in embassies across Europe before the war. These people had something priceless. They could move in high society circles. Their appearance in a neutral country aroused no suspicion. But Donovan didn't limit himself to intellectuals and aristocrats. He also recruited specialists of an entirely different profile. Safecrackers from prisons who could pick any lock. Counterfeiters capable of forging any document. Burglars, con men, smugglers. If someone had skills useful for covert operations, their past didn't matter. OSS attracted remarkably diverse people. Julia Child, the future famous cooking show host, worked in the research department developing shark repellent to save downed pilots. Baseball player Mo Berg, who knew 12 languages and had a law degree, became a spy in Europe. Actors, writers, journalists, all found uses for their talents. Training was intensive and eclectic. Basic courses took place in isolated camps where recruits learned skills never taught in the regular army. How to kill a man with bare hands. How to blow up a bridge or railway with minimal explosives. How to crack a safe, pick a lock, forge a document, how to set up and operate a clandestine radio transmitter, how to spot surveillance and evade it. Specialized courses were even more exotic. A school in Maryland taught interrogation methods and psychological pressure. Another in Virginia specialized in sabotage and demolition. A third in California prepared agents for work in Asia, studying Japanese culture and language. The British generously shared their experience. SOE instructors came to American camps, teaching the art of underground warfare. They showed how to organize a partisan movement, how to coordinate with local resistance, how to live under false identity in occupied territory. OSS weapons and equipment were often unique, created specifically for covert operations. The Research and Development Branch, headed by inventors and scientists, created remarkable devices. A pistol disguised as a fountain pen that fired once at close range. Explosives disguised as ordinary coal, planted in fuel depots. Miniature cameras hidden in matchboxes. There were more lethal inventions. The silenced pistol, a revolver with integrated suppressor, virtually silent. Special knives for silent killing. Poisons, from fast-acting to slow ones that mimicked natural death. Incendiary devices with timers that could detonate days or weeks after placement. By late 1942, OSS began full-scale operations. The organization grew from nothing to 13,000 personnel by war's end. They worked in all theaters, from North Africa to Burma, from occupied France to China. In Europe, OSS operations were most extensive and varied. Agents parachuted into occupied countries, established contact with resistance movements, coordinated guerrilla warfare. They transmitted intelligence on German fortifications, troop positions, industrial capacity. One of the most successful areas was work in neutral countries. Switzerland, surrounded by Axis nations but maintaining neutrality, became a center of espionage for all sides. Allen Dulles, future CIA director, headed OSS operations in Bern. His residence became the hub of an extensive spy network penetrating deep into the Third Reich. Dulles had sources within the German government itself. German diplomats disillusioned with the Nazis passed him secret documents. Industrialists who understood Germany was losing sought contacts with the Allies. Wehrmacht and Abwehr officers involved in plots against Hitler shared information. One of Dulles's most valuable sources was Fritz Kolbe, a German diplomat with access to secret correspondence. Under the codename George Wood, he passed over 1,600 classified documents, including information on German agents, military plans, diplomatic efforts. British intelligence initially didn't believe the material was genuine, suspecting disinformation. But OSS verified the data and found Kolbe provided absolutely reliable information. In occupied France, OSS worked closely with the French resistance. Jedburgh teams parachuted behind enemy lines shortly before D-Day. Each team consisted of 3 men, an American or Briton, a Frenchman, and a radio operator. They coordinated partisan actions, organized sabotage of communications, attacks on German rear areas. One such team, led by William Colby, future CIA director, operated in northern France. They organized a series of attacks on railways and bridges, delaying German reinforcements to Normandy. When the Allied advance began, their partisans attacked German columns on the roads, turning retreat into chaos. In Italy, OSS conducted one of the war's most audacious operations. Agents established contact with SS General Karl Wolff, commander of forces in northern Italy. Wolff, understanding the war was lost, sought a way to save himself and avoid Italy's destruction. Secret negotiations began for surrender of German forces in Italy independent of Berlin. Operation Sunrise was extremely risky. If Hitler discovered it, Wolff would be executed and negotiations would fail. OSS agents secretly met with Wolff and his representatives in Switzerland. Negotiations dragged on for months, requiring incredible caution. Finally, on May 2, 1945, a week before Germany's official surrender, nearly 1 million German soldiers in Italy laid down their arms. This saved thousands of lives and preserved Italian cities from destruction. In the Balkans, OSS supported Tito's Yugoslav partisans. Agents parachuted into Yugoslavia's mountains, delivered weapons, coordinated attacks on German communications. The work was exceptionally dangerous. Germans conducted brutal punitive operations against partisans. OSS agents lived in mountain camps, constantly moving, risking capture and execution. In Asia, OSS operated under completely different conditions. In China, they worked with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and Mao's communists, trying to coordinate resistance against the Japanese. In Burma, OSS units known as Detachment 101 operated in jungles with local Kachin tribes, attacking Japanese rear areas. Detachment 101 was a special unit. It was led by Colonel Karl Eifler, a charismatic leader with experience working with Native Americans. He understood that the Kachin, mountain tribes of northern Burma, were natural guerrillas. They hated the Japanese, knew the jungle intimately, were tough and brave. The Americans trained the Kachin, armed them, organized them into effective combat units. The Kachin attacked Japanese convoys on roads, set ambushes, destroyed bridges. They gathered intelligence on Japanese positions, rescued downed American pilots. By war's end, Detachment 101 commanded an army of 10,000 partisans controlling vast territories of northern Burma. One of OSS's most unusual operations occurred in Thailand. Thailand was Japan's ally, its troops participating in occupying neighboring countries. But the Thai ambassador to the U.S., Seni Pramoj, secretly led a resistance movement. OSS inserted agents into Bangkok, where they organized an underground network, preparing an uprising against the Japanese and the pro-Japanese government. Counterintelligence was another important OSS function. Section X2 employed specialists in identifying and neutralizing enemy agents. They analyzed intercepted communications, interrogated defectors, built files on thousands of suspects. One of X2's most successful officers, James Jesus Angleton, would later become the CIA's legendary counterintelligence chief, known for his paranoia and mole hunts. OSS's research and analysis branch was staffed with America's finest scholars. Historians, economists, geographers, linguists analyzed mountains of information, creating detailed files on enemy countries. They studied the German economy, identifying bottlenecks worth targeting, analyzed Japan's transportation network, planning sabotage. Their reports were often more accurate and detailed than military intelligence data. Psychological operations were a separate function. The morale operations branch created disinformation, fake newspapers, forged orders designed to undermine enemy morale. They spread rumors about corruption among Nazi leadership, about conspiracies, about inevitable defeat. Aircraft dropped millions of leaflets over German cities, calling for surrender. One of the most sophisticated operations involved forging German postage stamps. OSS created stamps identical to genuine ones, but with altered design. Instead of Hitler's profile, they depicted a skull. These stamps were distributed in Germany, appeared on letters, creating a subconscious association of the Nazi regime with death. Women played significant roles in OSS, unusual for the time. Virginia Hall, an American who'd lost a leg in a pre-war accident, became one of the most effective agents in occupied France. She organized resistance networks, coordinated weapons drops, helped downed pilots escape. The Gestapo hunted her, calling her the most dangerous Allied spy. She managed to evade capture, crossing the Pyrenees on foot in winter with a prosthetic leg. Mary Bancroft worked in Switzerland with Alan Dulles, was his mistress, and simultaneously a valuable agent. She had connections in Swiss high society, used them to gather information. Her psychological profiles of Nazi leaders were so accurate, they were used in strategic planning. Not all OSS operations succeeded. There were failures, sometimes catastrophic. Agents were captured and executed. Entire resistance networks were exposed. German counterintelligence was highly professional, and the Gestapo ruthless. One tragedy occurred in Holland. British intelligence parachuted agents into occupied Netherlands, but didn't know the Germans had captured their radio operators and controlled communications. Over 50 agents were dropped straight into Gestapo hands. Most were executed. OSS also lost several agents in this operation before the compromise was discovered. Working in Germany itself was especially dangerous. A police state with total control made penetration extremely difficult. Germans spoke German with numerous dialects. An unfamiliar accent immediately aroused suspicion. Documents were constantly checked. The slightest error meant arrest and torture. Nevertheless, OSS managed to insert several agents into Germany itself. One, a German communist emigrant, was parachuted in 1945 with orders to gather information on population mood. He worked in a factory, listened to workers' conversations, transmitted data by radio. He was caught weeks before war's end and executed. OSS's relationships with other intelligence services were complex. The British initially treated the Americans with patronizing skepticism. Their intelligence service had a century of history. They considered themselves masters of the spy craft. OSS seemed to them a group of enthusiastic amateurs. But gradually, the British acknowledged that the Americans learned quickly. OSS brought resources the British lacked: money, equipment, personnel. Cooperation deepened, especially in continental operations. By war's end, British and Americans worked as a single team in many regions. Relations with Soviet intelligence were tense. Officially, the USSR was an ally, but both sides spied on each other. The NKVD penetrated OSS, recruiting several employees. The most notable, Duncan Lee, was Donovan's own assistant, passing secrets to the Soviets. The scale of Soviet penetration would become known only after the war, causing scandal and paranoid spy hunts. U.S. military leadership viewed OSS ambivalently. Some generals valued intelligence and partisan support. Others considered Donovan and his people dilettantes, playing spy, diverting resources from real war. General MacArthur refused to allow OSS in his Southwest Pacific theater at all, preferring to rely on his own intelligence. By war's end, OSS was a huge organization, with a budget in the hundreds of millions. It had offices worldwide, from London to Chongqing. Thousands of agents worked in dangerous conditions. Many died before seeing victory. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, OSS shifted to post-war tasks. Agents collected Nazi documents, arrested war criminals, interrogated German scientists. Operation Paperclip recruited German rocket scientists and other specialists to work in America, ignoring their Nazi past. After Japan's surrender in August 1945, the war ended. President Truman, who'd replaced the deceased Roosevelt, saw no need to maintain such an organization in peacetime. On October 1, 1945, OSS was officially disbanded. Donovan was furious, warning that America would again be left without centralized intelligence. But many in government understood that the Cold War with the Soviet Union was already beginning. America needed intelligence, perhaps even more powerful than during the war. In 1947, Congress passed the National Security Act, creating the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. The CIA was OSS's direct heir. Many OSS veterans transferred to the new organization. Allen Dulles would become CIA director in the 1950s. Methods developed by OSS became standard practices. Connections established during the war would be used for decades. OSS culture also transferred to CIA. Preference for educated, intelligent agents from elite universities. Inclination toward unconventional operations and risk. A certain elitism and sense that they weren't subject to normal rules. Critics pointed out this elitist culture had drawbacks. OSS and later CIA were predominantly white, male, from upper classes. They had blind spots, didn't understand cultures and motivations of people beyond the Western world. These shortcomings would plague American intelligence for decades. but OSS's achievements were undeniable. In 3 years, the organization transformed from nothing into an effective intelligence service. They made significant contributions to victory, though precisely measuring it is impossible. How many lives did timely intelligence save? How much did partisan support matter? How much did psychological operations undermine enemy morale? The OSS story is also about how America learned to be a global power. Before the war, the U.S. was an isolationist country focused on its own continent. OSS forced thousands of Americans to work worldwide, understand other cultures, operate in the international arena. Many of these people would later become diplomats, businessmen, scholars shaping the post-war world. Donovan didn't live to see his creation's full legacy. He died in 1959 at age 76. Until his death, he remained convinced that strong intelligence was critical to national security. He was buried at Arlington Cemetery with full military honors. Many open-source software operations remain classified to this day. Complete archives aren't open to the public. Some operations were so sensitive that documents were destroyed. Historians continue finding new materials, uncovering details unknown for decades. OSS veterans rarely spoke about their work. The habit of secrecy developed during the war persisted. Many took their secrets to the grave. Only in their final years did some begin sharing memories, understanding that history must be preserved. Their stories show war from a completely different perspective. Not grand battles with thousands of soldiers, but individuals or small groups operating in shadows. A classics professor parachuting into occupied Greece. A Wall Street banker meeting with German conspirators in a Swiss cafe. A college student encrypting secret messages in a Washington office. OSS proved that intellect could be a weapon as powerful as tanks and bombers. That sometimes one person with the right information in the right place could change events more than an entire division. That modern war requires not only courage and strength, but cunning, patience, ability to understand the enemy. The legacy of the gentlemen spies is complex. They were pioneers who created American intelligence, but they also established patterns and culture that would cause problems later. Elitism, secrecy, conviction of their own righteousness sometimes led to catastrophic mistakes in the Cold War. But in the context of World War II, their contribution was enormous. They fought in a shadow war, without the glory of public victories, often risking everything for information or an operation that might never become known. Many died in obscurity, their names not carved on monuments, their exploits not described in history textbooks. The OSS story is a reminder that war isn't fought only on battlefields, that sometimes the most important battles occur in silence, in secret meetings, in encrypted messages, in risky operations no one will know about for decades. It's a story of how intellect, education, and courage can serve as weapons in the struggle for freedom. Unit X, as OSS was sometimes called, was an experiment, an attempt to create a new type of military organization, combining academic intellect with operational daring. The experiment succeeded beyond the most optimistic expectations, and though the organization itself lasted only 3 years, its ideas, methods, and people shaped American intelligence for generations to come.